They say every neighborhood has its own politics. But nothing could have prepared me for the little war that unfolded on a quiet street in western Montana, a place I'd picked precisely because I thought it was the kind of town where nothing ever happened. I was wrong, dead wrong, because the day they poured concrete into my private well was the day I stopped playing by anyone else's rules. I moved to Ashwood Bluffs 6 months after selling my engineering consultancy, a decision that was supposed to mark the start of a slower, quieter chapter of my life. I'd spent my 20s buried under deadlines and meetings, designing water and drainage systems for luxury developments all over the country. I was good at it. So good that by 35 I had enough money to buy a house outright and never look back. And that's exactly what I did. A sprawling ranch-style home at the edge of a pine-lined cul-de-sac, with enough space to build something I'd dreamed about for years. A personal water system, independent, efficient, and cleaner than anything the city could ever deliver. Building that well was more than a project. It was a statement. Promised to myself that I wouldn't spend another day relying on systems built by people who didn't care about quality. I drilled 30 feet down into pristine groundwater, installed state-of-the-art filtration, even added an automated panel that monitored pH and purity in real time. At night, soft LED lights illuminated the water's surface, a subtle, almost artistic glow that made the whole thing feel like something out of a resort. And when I tasted that first glass of water, crisp, cold, absolutely pure, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. That well was mine, every inch of it, built with my own hands, fueled by my own knowledge, existing entirely outside anyone else's control. 3 days after I finished it, my doorbell rang, and there she was. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, handing me a wicker basket filled with overpriced cookies. Her name was Caroline Hughes, president of the Ashwood Bluffs Homeowners Association, and she looked exactly like the kind of person who would introduce herself with a title. Mid-40s, surgically precise makeup, posture that screamed control. Her husband had been a high-profile attorney in Seattle before they divorced, and rumor had it she'd used the settlement money to buy the biggest house in the subdivision. "Everyone's been talking about your project," she said, strolling around the well with her arms crossed like a property inspector. "It's ambitious." "I'm a civil engineer," I explained, pulling up the app that displayed water quality data. "I built water systems for resorts and high-rises for a decade. This is cleaner than the city supply. 10 times cleaner, actually." For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of genuine curiosity, but it was gone as fast as it came, replaced by something colder. "That's impressive," she said flatly. "But here in Ashwood Bluffs, we like things to be simple, harmonious, in line with the community." "Harmony with nature?" I asked a little too eagerly. "That's exactly the point of this system. Sustainability, self-reliance." "I meant harmony with the community," she said, stressing the word like it was a warning. "We like everything to flow smoothly here." Something about the way she said smoothly made my stomach tighten, but I shrugged it off. I figured she was just one of those HOA types who lived for lawn ordinances and mailbox paint colors. I couldn't have known then just how far she was willing to go. A week later, I attended my first HOA meeting and walked straight into an ambush. Caroline stood at the front of a beige community center room, flipping through a thick folder of papers, as if she were about to read a court ruling. "Before we begin our regular business," she said, "I'm pleased to announce some new community guidelines. 15 of them. 15 new guidelines that just so happen to outlaw nearly every part of my well system. The lighting, the decorative stone rim, even the filtration unit I'd installed below ground." I stood up, my voice steady but sharp. "These rules weren't in place when I built my well. I followed every existing guideline. You can't just make new ones to target a completed project. No one would meet my eyes." People stared at their phones, fiddled with papers, pretended they hadn't heard. And Caroline, well, she just smiled. "Communities evolve, Mr. Carter, and so must their standards." From that moment on, the campaign began. Violation notices showed up on my door like clockwork. $75 a day, because my solar panel was unauthorized electronic decor. $100 fines because my tomato plants were 6 inches too close to the fence. Meanwhile, the house across the street had Christmas lights up in July, and not a single ticket. It was clear this wasn't about rules. This was about breaking me down, one ridiculous citation at a time. And then came the warning I should have taken more seriously. Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly woman who lived next door, slipped a note into my mailbox one night. "Be careful," it read. "She's planning something with the county." I heard her mention environmental concerns. I started digging into the HOA's power and learned something terrifying. If Caroline could convince county officials that my well posed a contamination risk, they could shut it down. And buried deep in the city's water service contract was a clause that said, any verified environmental violation could result in a suspension of service for the entire community. That's when I understood her real plan, not just to destroy my well, but to destroy my independence and make me the villain in the process. The breaking point came one cold morning just after dawn. I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery, the low, throaty growl of diesel engines, and ran outside to find 2 concrete trucks in my driveway. Workers in hard hats were already circling the well, wrapping it in plastic and setting up hoses. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted. "Emergency environmental remediation," one of them said, handing me a clipboard full of legalese. "The HOA reported your well as a contamination source. We have authorization from the county to seal it immediately." Contamination? That's insane. I have water tests. I have certifications. It's cleaner than municipal water. "Then take it up with them," he said, jerking a thumb toward a county vehicle parked across the street. A man with a badge was photographing my property like it was a crime scene. Within minutes, thick gray concrete began pouring into the well. 25 feet of engineering perfection buried under a slurry of bureaucracy and lies. I filmed every minute of it, but it didn't matter. 2 hours later, my pride and joy was gone, entombed beneath a block of hardened cement. Caroline showed up just in time to watch the last of it. "I'm so sorry about all this," she said with a smile that could cut glass. "But sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good. I'm sure you'll enjoy city water like the rest of us." "You fabricated this," I said, my voice shaking. "You know this well was safe." "That's a very serious accusation," she said, tilting her head. "I hope you're not suggesting that county health officials would participate in a conspiracy." She laughed, actually laughed, and walked away while I stood there, staring at the wreckage of something I'd poured my soul into. And that's when it hit me. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd roll over, accept defeat, and become just another quiet, compliant homeowner. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I spent the next 3 days buried in research, combing through municipal contracts, environmental statutes, and case law. Caroline's little stunt, filing a false contamination report, wasn't just unethical. It was illegal, and worse for her. It triggered the exact clause in the city's water contract that allowed service suspension for false reporting. All I needed was proof, and if there's one thing engineers are good at, it's building systems, so I built one. I texted her. "I think we should talk. Maybe work out a compromise." Her reply came within minutes. "Absolutely. Let's put this behind us. How about tomorrow afternoon in your backyard?" Perfect. I spent that night turning my patio into a recording studio. A tiny camera hidden in a planter, a backup mic inside a speaker, a third audio recorder tucked beneath the table. When she arrived the next day, wearing a sundress and carrying an expensive bottle of wine, she looked like she was meeting a friend for brunch, not the man she'd just publicly humiliated. "I have to hand it to you," I said as we sat down. "That whole environmental thing, I never saw it coming." "Oh, sometimes you have to get creative," she purred. "People respond better to authority than to simple requests. How'd you even know that would work?" I asked, playing dumb. "Please," she scoffed. "I've been running communities for years. Environmental safety is the one thing officials never question. One phone call to a friend who knows how to write a convincing report, a few scary-sounding phrases, and boom. Instant action. A friend?" I said casually. $500, she said, laughing. "Worth every penny." Honestly, that well was probably illegal anyway, and even if it wasn't, Who wants a neighbor acting like they're better than everyone else with their own private water source? So it wasn't really about contamination, I pressed. It was about me, standing out. Oh, absolutely, she said, raising her glass. If I let one person build a private well, pretty soon everyone will want one. Then who's going to pay for the municipal water system? The whole thing would fall apart. I had to nip that in the bud. I sat there, nodding, smiling, while inside my heart was pounding. I had her. Every arrogant word, every admission of fraud, every motive laid bare, and once I had what I needed, I did the one thing she never expected. I turned her own system against her. The next morning, I called the City of Ashwood Springs Water Department. I need to report a violation of your service contract, I said. I have video evidence of fraudulent environmental reporting used to manipulate county officials. 48 hours later, Caroline Hughes's perfect little empire began to crumble. Every home in Ashwood Bluffs received the same notice. Water service temporarily suspended pending investigation of contract violations. Phones started ringing. People panicked. No showers, no coffee, no working toilets. And for once, it had nothing to do with me. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd simply reported a crime and let the city enforce its own rules. By the time the emergency HOA meeting was called that evening, the community center was packed with furious, unwashed neighbors demanding answers. Caroline stood at the front, pale but defiant. "We're dealing with a simple misunderstanding," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I'm confident we'll resolve this soon." "Actually," I said, standing up, "there's no misunderstanding at all." I plugged my laptop into the projector and hit play, and the room fell silent. Caroline's voice echoed through the room, as if she were standing there bragging all over again. $500 to someone who knows how to make things sound official and scary. Worth every penny. Who wants a neighbor acting like they're better than everyone else? When the recording ended, the silence broke into chaos. People shouted over one another, demanding explanations, calling for her resignation. One man in the back yelled, "My kids couldn't take a bath last night because of your lies." Another woman shouted, "You risked our whole water supply because you were jealous." Mrs. Whitaker, the same woman who had warned me, stood up, trembling with anger. "You made us accomplices to your harassment campaign," she said. "You abused your power and dragged this whole community into your personal vendetta." Caroline tried to speak, raising her hands for calm. "Everyone, please. We don't know if this recording has been manipulated." "It's unedited," I interrupted, pulling up the time-stamped metadata on the screen. "Every second is authentic. And every second proves you committed fraud. It took less than 3 minutes for someone to call for a vote. I move that we remove Caroline Hughes as HOA president immediately," shouted a man in the second row. Dozens of hands shot into the air. The vote wasn't even close. 48 in favor, 1 against. Hers. For the first time since I'd moved in, Caroline looked small, diminished. A queen stripped of her crown. The next part was almost poetic. The same people who had avoided me for months, too afraid to stand up to her, now turned to me for help. "Ethan," Mrs. Whitaker said, "you understand how this works. Can you help us fix this?" I had already prepared a plan. "I've spoken to the city," I explained. "If we submit a formal statement disavowing Caroline's actions and agree to cooperate fully with the investigation, they'll restore water within 24 hours. The vote passed unanimously. Caroline's signature was nowhere to be found. By the next morning, water was flowing again. And for the first time in months, I felt something even sweeter than revenge. Justice. The fallout for Caroline was swift and brutal. The county launched an investigation into the false contamination report, and criminal charges were on the table for filing fraudulent government documents. The city hit her with civil penalties for breaching the water service contract. And on top of that, the HOA voted to make her personally liable for the $15,000 it would cost to compensate me for the destroyed well, plus the community's legal fees. But the money wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the humiliation. Caroline's name was plastered across local news sites. Her once loyal neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. The charity boards she'd chaired quietly removed her name. And when the for sale sign went up in front of her mansion 3 weeks later, Nobody was surprised. As for me, I used the settlement money to build a new well. Deeper, cleaner, smarter. This time I designed it with multiple access points so my immediate neighbors could hook up if they wanted. Mrs. Whitaker was the first to ask, then 2 more families. Before long, we had our own little network, a micro water grid independent of the city's system. The irony was delicious. Caroline had fought so hard to crush my independence that she'd ended up inspiring the very thing she feared most. A small community that valued self-sufficiency and innovation over conformity and control. The new well became more than just a water source. We landscaped the area with native plants and built benches around it. Kids played there in the evenings. Neighbors gathered to chat, share ideas, even plan other projects. A greenhouse, a solar array, a shared garden. Ashwood Bluffs felt alive in a way it never had under Caroline's rule. And the ripple effects didn't stop there. The investigation into her actions uncovered a long pattern of abuse, selective rule enforcement, retroactive fines, intimidation campaigns against anyone who challenged her. Several residents filed their own complaints. Caroline's attempts to find a new HOA position in another community were blocked when board members there received copies of the recording and court documents. Her reputation was toast. One afternoon, months later, I was sitting by the new well with Mrs. Whitaker, watching the sun dip behind the pines. "You know," she said, "Caroline always said she was protecting property values by keeping everything the same. But look at us now. Property values are up and people actually want to live here." She was right. The place had changed. People were less afraid, more creative. Projects popped up everywhere. And every one of them, from the garden to the solar panels to the community greenhouse, was a little middle finger to the idea that progress had to be controlled. Sometimes, I think about the moment they poured that first bucket of concrete into my well. How furious and helpless I felt watching something I'd built disappear. But now, when I stand beside the new one, watching kids splash in the water and neighbors laughing in the evening light, I realize it was the best thing that could have happened. Caroline wanted to destroy my independence. Instead, she forced me to redefine it, and to build something stronger, smarter, and far more meaningful than I could have built alone. As the sky faded into night, I looked down at the water glowing softly beneath the LEDs and whispered to myself, "Thanks for the lesson, Caroline. This is what freedom really looks like." Now I'll leave you with a question, one I've been thinking about ever since this whole mess started. When someone in power abuses their authority to control others, is it better to fight them head-on, or to outsmart them and make their system collapse under its own weight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I think this debate is far from over, and something tells me I'm not the only one who's ever had to stand up to a bully with a clipboard.